Hello and welcome back to the News Project. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today. It's also a great pleasure to be joined by Lieutenant Governor David Zuckerman, who is running for the Democratic Party's nomination for the governorship. Over the course of his political career, Lieutenant Governor Zuckerman's interests have included renewable energy, affordable housing, livable wages, cannabis reform, GMO legislation, universal health care, progressive taxation, marriage equality, and end-of-life choices. Mr. Zuckerman served for 14 years as a state representative, representing a district in Burlington. In 2012, he was elected to the Vermont State Senate as a progressive Democrat and served as the vice chair of the Senate Committee on Agriculture during that time. In 2016, he won election as lieutenant governor and has since then served 2 terms. This conversation with Lieutenant Governor Zuckerman is one of our series of interviews and discussions with some of the leading candidates who are running for Vermont's governorship. Lieutenant Governor Zuckerman, welcome back to the News Project. Great to have you with us today, and thank you very much for making the time available to talk with us.
Andrew, it's my pleasure. It's too bad you can't do it in person. I really enjoyed visiting your great little studio down there, and it's too bad not getting a chance to get around the state as much as we normally would, for sure.
Why don't we just jump right into it here? If you're elected governor in November and you're writing down your State of the State message you're going to give to the legislature come next January, what would be some of the leading items you'd be thinking about and wanting to express to the legislature? Are there 2 or 3 things that really are top of mind to you that you want to get into right away as governor?
Well, there's no doubt that the number 1, 2 issues are going to be the economy and rebuilding the economy and making sure people are healthy and safe, because the COVID epidemic, I think, and pandemic is going to continue in some form or another for quite some time until we have a vaccine and we have herd immunity. So it'll be front and center. We'll be focusing on rebuilding the economy, making sure the economy is rebuilt in a way that that can be better than the economy we had before. This epidemic has shown the incredible economic inequity in our state, and the fact that half the folks were living paycheck to paycheck really put them on the precarious edge when we entered this. And folks are struggling, and we've got to make sure every day Vermonters are cared for, and not only cared for, but are part of the rebuild of our economy. My kickoff back in January was about our rural economy. It was about our climate and our agricultural economy. And we need to make sure as we rebuild, whether it's with state funds or federal funds, that we really set ourselves up for a thriving future. A lot of weatherization jobs, renewable energy jobs, diversified agriculture jobs that could build a more resilient food system for these kinds of pandemics or challenges that are going to be brought on by the climate crisis. These are all key issues. And then justice. Justice is critical. It was a part of my kickoff originally, talking about how everybody is welcome here, from those who are born here, those who choose to move here, and those who are indigenous to this land. That phrase in my kickoff was really a touch point about the fact that we need to make sure all citizens of Vermont have the opportunity to thrive. And we've clearly seen across this country the issue of Black Lives Matter and injustice to people who aren't white, born native to the state 6 generations in. We need to make sure everyone has an opportunity, not only those who are born here and have had roots here for a while, but those who are born here even longer as indigenous folks, those who have been born here for multiple generations that people don't realize because they have biases and say, oh, I didn't know communities of color had been living here for 3 or 4 generations. We need to build our criminal justice system, our economic justice system in a way that really enables everyone to thrive and not feel like they are treated differently, and not only feel like, but make sure they aren't treated differently going forward.
What about the issue of the minimum wage? I know you've mentioned that frequently in some of your campaign announcements.
Absolutely.
The legislature wound up increasing it a little bit but it didn't get to the $15 an hour
Right.
level that a lot of folks, yourself included, I believe, were hoping to see. Would that be a priority for you come next year?
Well, absolutely. The minimum wage, first indexing it, also giving it bumps that are bigger than inflation, are critical to really addressing what I started out with around some of the economic inequity in our state. What we've seen, the governor vetoed twice minimum wage increases. First was a 4-year plan to $15 an hour. Then he vetoed even the couple-year plan to $12.50 an hour, $12.55. That is shocking to me when during this coronavirus pandemic, we are talking about these frontline workers, often minimum wage workers, as being essential to our economy, essential to our food supply system, essential to our way of life. If they're so essential, why are we not paying people in those jobs a decent livable wage? And that will be a cornerstone not only of the campaign, but it will be a key piece of going forward as governor starting in January to make sure that when this bump and increase ends, we continue to build better economic footing for those at the bottom of the economic ladder. There are many, many people, particularly women, particularly communities of color, but plenty of breadwinners, those both being breadwinners, that people in a traditional mindset think the man is the breadwinner or the white man is the breadwinner in our society. But these folks are trying to raise families on these incomes. It's no longer just, high school and college students working in the grocery stores stocking shelves. We have to make it so that folks that are living and working full time in this state can pay their bills and not be living on the edge.
I wanted to ask you a question about agriculture because when you're not being lieutenant governor, you're being a farmer up in Heinsberg, I believe.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you followed the ups and downs of the state's agricultural sector very closely. The dairy side of that in particular seems to have had a lot of struggles lately with the price of milk not being high enough to make it profitable for many dairy farmers to stay in business, basically. What should the state be doing, if anything, to help support those farmers that may be struggling, or to keep the state's dairy industry at some kind of level that would allow it to survive and thrive?
Well, we have been struggling with low milk prices for almost 5 years, and it was finally coming out of that when COVID hit and just chopped the legs out right from underneath the rebuilding of the dairy pricing. I've been talking for a long time about the need for Vermont to differentiate its milk and get a better price in the marketplace. As long as dairy is a commodity product, I think that we're going to see our dairy struggle. It can be produced cheaper in other parts of the country with larger, wide open landscapes and different transportation systems closer to the grain production. And if we don't do something to differentiate Vermont's milk and get a better price from the marketplace, use the economy that's out there, use capitalism, get the better price out of the marketplace and get that back to our dairy farmers, they're going to really struggle economically. And I think this is also a key piece of our environmental footprint. When farmers are pushed to squeeze the land for everything they can get out of it, that's when we have the environmental consequences that we're seeing from agriculture, as well as other sectors of our economy. But water quality is agriculture and developed land. And if we don't do something, and we must, to brand Vermont milk, maybe with some characteristics around either animal husbandry, workers' rights, and so forth, that would get a better price out of the Boston, New York, and New Jersey marketplaces, I think we're in trouble. We also have a real opportunity to invest in the broader agricultural sector with the pandemic showing the real need to have more resilience in our food system. We have farmers that can grow a lot more food, but we need to invest in the processing and storage of that food so that we have the capacity for more than a week or two to feed Vermonters if there ends up being a big disruption in the food supply. And whether it's another pandemic, whether it's the climate crisis, whether it's migration of people due to climate issues around the world, we need to be more resilient and we need to be planning more for the future. We need to be more proactive. And that's going to be one of the big differences in my administration from the current one, is not just one that reacts well. We definitely have to react well to serious threats and consequences and issues in our society, like the pandemic. But we also have to be doing more proactive work to build the resiliency to be a stronger economy and a stronger food system to be more resilient when the next challenge comes before us.
Let me just stick with the environmental aspect of that then for a minute and ask you what your thoughts are on the revision of Act 250. It's been discussed in the legislature now for a couple of years. They haven't been able to kind of come up with a compromise, if you will, that everyone could sort of agree with. What do you think needs to be incorporated into that revised version to make it go forward?
Well, it's a complex issue, but I do think we need to create more incentives for compact development in village centers and town centers. The current sprawling of Vermont people is one of the most geographically diverse of anywhere in the country. And it's led to us being one of the highest per capita mileage driving states in the country. So if we're talking about the environment and the climate crisis, we can't be driving 15,000 miles a year in our cars. And if we rebuild our village centers with more perpetual affordable housing, more housing in general, also then the ability to have enough people for a town store or a town economic development hub, a tech hub or whatnot, where you have good broadband running through all our villages, then we have an opportunity to build a Vermont for the future. Now, there are consequences to that. I've heard from a number of water quality folks who are really concerned that the sewage systems and the water systems either can't supply more houses and small businesses or can't handle the effluent from more housing. I think we really have to explore that and look at better alternatives for sewage treatment, whether it's including more composting type facilities, whether it's upgrading the facilities we have. So it can't just be changing Act 250. It's got to be looking at the ramifications of that as a whole. But there's no doubt that we need to work towards people living in our village centers and in our town centers from an economic and an environmental perspective. I think it is the better way to go in the long run. We just have to make sure to plan around all the issues that are going to arise.
Let me pivot to another major area of that's sort of an ongoing subject of conversation around the state, and that's education. If you're elected governor, what would be your approach to helping the state colleges stay in business?
Well, let's remember that the state colleges are a huge key piece of our economy. There was a teacher I was talking to in Johnson who talked about the fact that some of his students, when they heard that news, thought, I'm done. I'm not going to go on to further education. My one hope was to be able to go to local state college, live at home, and have it be somewhat more affordable to get that next degree to get a good job. And I get that in the southern part of the state, these three campuses may not be quite as close, but I know in the southern part of the state, you're reeling from the closing of numerous small private state colleges, or not state colleges, but colleges. And it's a huge economic impact, not only for the opportunity for young Vermonters, but the economic impact on those communities and those regions that these facilities are located in. I think our state colleges actually have a real opportunity coming out of this pandemic because they are small campuses in rural Vermont where we actually can draw folks from the urban areas who are concerned maybe about going to 20,000 and 40,000 person universities in dense urban areas, and actually can be in safer communities from a COVID perspective and get a more intimate, high quality education, especially if we start to target and allow some of these facilities to be more focused. They don't need to be broad liberal arts colleges for everyone. They need the liberal arts background, but they could focus on education, elder and senior care, nursing, some of the areas where we know there's a shortage coming of qualified workforce in these arenas, and we need these people in Vermont. So not only could Vermonters go, but we could attract more out-of-state students, which would actually help with some of the funding challenge. And we can do it through creative marketing with good majors, as well as marketing of safety in the community. And so I think there's opportunities. They have to stay open. The economic impact of higher education in Vermont is huge. And those three campuses alone, NVU was about $137 million impact in the northern part of the state. So we cannot let them close. That would be penny wise, pound foolish. We have to invest in them. We have to be nimble and adjust them. We have to trim some at the top and really make it really thrive from the bottom. I have to tell you, in all the issues I've worked on over the years, and you listed some at the beginning of the program, the organic grassroots outcry to the closing of those institutions outclassed anything that I've seen in my 20 years of public service. There were over 30,000 petition signatures within about a week saying, keep these open. I remember on the Friday of the announcement, the governor's press conference said, we just maybe don't have the money to do this. Those weren't his exact words, but he was kind of saying, I guess we have to do this. He is an ex officio on the State College Board of Trustees. He knew this was coming, and if he didn't, someone on his staff should have known for quite some time. And while he was doing little increases in proposals, the urgency was not coming from this administration, and he was ready to let it happen. And by Sunday, that was Friday, by Sunday, he was already shifting significantly to saying, well, wait a minute, maybe I don't agree with this. That's part of the reactive governance that we've seen, as opposed to the proactive governance to say, this is coming, it's a major problem. We need to find the money in a big way to make this happen. We need to adjust the administration of these institutions so that they are focused like a laser on success and bringing very disciplined courses of study that will attract students. And we need to maybe trim the $8 million administrative budget of the state colleges to help fund these programs to attract more students, both in-state and out-of-state, to generate better funding. We didn't see that. But looking forward, we have to look at how much we spend in incarceration and policing. We spend a tremendous amount of money on the back end of the problems created by not investing on the front end. If we were to take incarceration resources, through COVID, I think we put out about 200 people that were incarcerated that didn't need to be during the pandemic. Well, if they didn't need to be incarcerated during the pandemic, why did they need to be incarcerated at all? In which case, let's use those resources saved and put them into higher education, early child care, and so forth, so that we have fewer people needing to go into the system in the first place. If we reprioritize law enforcement funding, some of it, into different forms of interdiction, whether it's economic development, whether it's mental health counseling, whether it's services that don't have to be police showing up to address a situation, but folks that can de-escalate a situation so we don't even get involved with the criminal justice system. Those are the ways that we can start to address higher education and criminal justice reform and deal with justice issues in the economy in a much more proactive way.
Pre-K through 12th grade public education is a big concern in Vermont. It's been a big issue and a sort of an ongoing discussion point for as long as I can remember. If indeed we're looking at a kind of worst case scenario around funding education, does that suggest to you that we need to kind of maybe look at maybe more consolidation of schools or school districts, or is the more traditional model of community schools and local control and that sort of thing so important that we've gone as far as we need to go with like Act 46 and
I don't think we need to go down the road of further consolidation. I think what was done was difficult enough as it was, and some of those districts we might need to relook at. There's a couple things. Vermonters greatly value the education of our kids. There's surveys coming out and information coming out that our teachers are paid about average for the region. We are not overpaying our teachers. They are one of the few sectors in our society that has kept up with inflation because minimum wage has been dropping behind. So sometimes there's some resentment, but I don't think that resentment leads to let's hurt our kids and their futures. We need to make sure we fund our schools and fund those futures for our kids. And I think there's a few ways to do that. One is this challenge for the Ed Fund, and it looks like it's about 100 to 110 million. Originally, they were thinking closer to 160, is really likely to be a 1 or 2 year challenge as we rebuild the economy. So do we just austerity budget and cut 2,000 teacher positions across the state as the governor proposed doing? I don't think so. We either can bond for it and spread this very acute, massive challenge over a long period of time so that we don't just nail people with high taxes. I think that's one way to go about it. I also think it's going to be very interesting to see with the influx of out-of-staters, which right now we are seeing a huge sort of swarm of property purchasing by down southern New England buyers saying, maybe I don't want to live in an urban area anymore. Vermont and northern New Hampshire and northern New York all look a lot safer than the urban areas. Now, Vermont looks better because we have better education. Vermont looks better because we care about our environment and our social services. So I think a lot of those folks in New York and Boston are looking to move to Vermont. That's going to change some of the funding situation for our schools by having more people here to pay some of those taxes. But we need to be creative. I think there's areas where in our human services budget and in our education budget, we overlap our services with some of these families that are struggling. And what if we were to blend those services, look for ways to save some money and provide a better continuum from preschool services through school provided services in that 2 through 6 and 8 year old window, to save some state money on the human services and education side and invest those in education so that we don't have to fill as big a hole as was created by the pandemic.
And of course, one of the other issues that we've seen emerge very loud and clear over the past couple of months with the pandemic is the whole question of broadband coverage around the state. Schools have been trying to do remote learning, and in some districts that at least they had the infrastructure to make that at least work fairly well, and then other parts of the state not so much.
But when I kicked off my campaign, and even before that, I talked about a Green Mountain New Deal for our economy and for the environment and the climate. And a core piece of that was affordable housing in our village centers, which I talked about earlier, as well as really creating that broadband network that we need to really boost our economy. And as it turns out, none of us realized it at the time, would have also made education equity far more real in our state, because we've had huge disparities in economic and education opportunities because we don't have broadband wired up into the kingdom and really into some of the areas down in the southern part of the state where you are. And when you look at the economic opportunity that the southern 4 counties have with good broadband, with our good rural education system, to develop an attractive quality for folks to live and work and thrive in Vermont with clients from those businesses that they could have if they had good broadband. They could have clients in Boston, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut. And the proximity benefit that Southern Vermont has compared to, say, rural Nebraska or rural Wyoming, for these people to settle and live in, but then travel to meet their clients every 6 weeks for 3 days and 2 nights. You could meet with your clients, and then you could be in Vermont for 6 weeks, working from home or from a little tech micro business center in a village center with other people running their businesses out of the same space. And you could actually have good paying jobs in Vermont, in our small towns. You could have folks that then at lunch are going to go out to the local store and buy that sandwich every day, buy that coffee every day, load up on the things they need for that evening's dinner, maybe have a restaurant in town because you have enough people with enough money and enough critical mass to have a small restaurant in town, and people would go to restaurants to nearby towns. That's one of the key factors. Broadband is a huge piece of that to attract and keep good paying businesses here and to help our education system. So it's really an investment we have to make. And we would do it through a Green Mountain New Deal. And to clarify what that means, during the Trump tax cuts, the wealthiest 5% of Vermonters reaped about a $200 million tax cut. If we were to sequester half of that for about 5 years, and invest $100 million in our rural and town village economy. We could invest in broadband. We could invest in affordable housing. We could invest in saving working Vermonters and seniors in their homes the costs of weatherizing their homes or installing renewable energy on their homes so that they could start to have immediate economic benefit, which would put them in a better place on their tight economics. That's the kind of vision that I would bring to the governor's office, is one that invests in our working people and their future and opportunity throughout Vermont.
And we have time for one last question, and so I want to circle back to that issue about the defunding the police and the Black Lives Matter demonstrations that we've been seeing lately. What do you think ought to be the way forward here on our law enforcement front in the wake of all the demonstrations we've been seeing lately?
Well, the term defund the police is a bit inarticulate because at its core, it would mean eliminate funding, defund, eliminate funding. And I think that does strike people as pretty stark and a bit aggressive with respect to the changes that need to happen. But when I talk to folks who are saying defund police, they really mean taking 20, maybe 30% of the funding that's been huge increases to law enforcement over the last couple decades and saying, let's put that funding earlier in the stream to reduce the need for as much law enforcement interdiction. So that might mean, as you said, mental health services. It might mean economic development for various disadvantaged communities. It might mean different support services around drug issues and education. And if we were to put money earlier in the stream, more proactively, again, law enforcement is actually a part of the reactive mindset that we all have. Someone does something, we are reacting to it to address the problem. Let's prevent the problems as much as we can. And we've seen that as police have become more militarized and a bigger part of our society, we haven't really seen the cause of their need diminish. So let's look at a different tactic for reducing the need for the interdiction by law enforcement. And let's look at their training. Right now, the Criminal Justice Council is all law enforcement individuals and very few other perspectives. The legislature just passed a bill, I think it was S-124, with language that would put a broader range of people on the Criminal Justice Council, from domestic violence, prevention folks, mental health, 3 folks appointed by the governor that would have no relationship to law enforcement, but more community development and community building. And let's have our Criminal Justice Council, which deals with then setting up training of our future law enforcement to be a more holistic mindset. So let's look at the fact right now that a law enforcement officer is trained for 60 hours in ordnance, and firearms, and 4 hours for community. What about shifting that mindset a bit? Law enforcement used to walk through the community, be members of the community. People didn't fear law enforcement. We definitely have a segment of society that are communities of color that literally fear law enforcement, sometimes won't even call law enforcement because of the consequences that might happen because of explicit and implicit biases. We are missing what we could be doing. And in a Zuckerman administration, you would see that conversation shift, not to defund, aka eliminate police, but to shift how we address the challenges in our society so we can have a stronger society moving forward, and not just think if we just keep putting more and more people in jail, that's what's going to solve our problems.
I guess we'll have to leave it there for now, but
would love to. I appreciate the time. Our economy, our climate, and justice issues are first and foremost, and really, if we tackle those, we'll have a better state going forward. Thank you for letting me be on your show.
Well, thank you for your time, Lieutenant Governor. Really appreciate it. And I'm about to say we'll see you out there on the campaign trail, but a little bit different this year.
Yeah. Stay safe, everybody.
All right. Thanks again for your time, sir.